Hello, welcome to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute's Center for Advancing Canada's Interests Abroad. I'm in Parliament today to welcome Her Excellency Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, the Kurdistan Regional Government's representative to the United States. As you know, today Iraq and Kurdistan is in the middle of a great contest of wills. The will of the Kurdish people as enacted through their referendum last month, and the will of the Iraqi federal government to try and suppress that aspiration for freedom. We're joined today by Her Excellency Bayan to discuss the issues of the region and get a real insight from one of the leading experts of the world on what is affecting the Kurdish people, their aspiration, and the complicated region that they're confronting today. So thank you, Bayan. Iraq today is on the precipice of civil war. There has been the incursion of the Iraqi militias in Kirkuk. The Kurdish people are searching around the world for their best friends right now, and they are scant. They're not easily identified and standing with the Kurdish people in this deep time of need. I'll have to ask the question, in September, when the KRG decided to proceed with the referendum, why did they do that now? What was the significance of having this referendum on Kurdish independence in September 2017?
We wanted to hold a referendum much earlier, years earlier, but because of the fight against ISIS, it was set aside. But why did we even want a referendum? The Kurds have wanted an independent state for 100 years, essentially since the creation of Iraq and the carving up of the Middle East. But in 2003, we decided that we would be part of the new Iraq. We had a choice in 2003. We had been autonomous since '91. We knew that America was about to intervene, and we made a decision that we wouldn't push for independence. Instead, we would join the new Iraq, an Iraq that we believed would be federal, democratic, secular, and we genuinely invested in this new Iraq. We helped to draft the new constitution, which was passed in 2005. We sent some of our best people to Baghdad. President of Iraq was Jalal Talabani, a Kurd. And the foreign minister, later the finance minister, was Hoshyar Zebari. And members of parliament. Kurdistan has had a bloc in the Iraqi parliament since 2005, let's say. We have done our best to make Iraq work. But unfortunately, what we have seen in the decade following 2005, the constitution, we have seen violations of the constitution by successive prime ministers and governments in Baghdad, the international community largely turning a blind eye to that. We have seen the hounding of the Sunni community. We have seen the Iraqi army turn into a sectarian army, which is why they fled when ISIS came. We have seen some of the key institutions that were set out in the constitution not be created. For example, to ensure the federal structure of Iraq, the constitution stipulates that there should be 2 chambers of parliament, the House of Representatives and a second chamber. The second chamber, established by a large majority in the parliament, would create a chamber that represents the regions and the provinces, thereby guaranteeing the federal structure of Iraq. We don't have a second chamber. There are many other examples I can give you of violations and of articles of the Constitution that have been ignored, including Article 140 on the disputed territories. So we're seeing Iraq over the decade after 2005. I say 2005 because this is when the Constitution was passed. Over that decade, we see Iraq becoming more sectarian, more violent, and we don't see a partnership. We don't see that Kurds are seen as partners. We don't see a governance by consensus. We hear more and more noises from the Shia majority that they believe in majoritarian rule. So then we have ISIS, which commits genocide against the Christians, the Yazidis, the Kurds, and others, including fellow Arabs. And all of the problems that we had seen bubbling away, festering before ISIS came, have essentially been suspended over the past 3 years. The international community has had a focus on ISIS. it has ignored the fact that the problems that created ISIS have never been dealt with. We have those. In addition to that, over the past 3 years, we have seen a creation of new problems, including the creation of the Popular Mobilization Force.
The Shia militias.
The Shia militias, but we're not bothered whether they're Shia, Sunni. What we're bothered about is that this is an armed wing of effectively a force led by Iran, loyal to Iran. This is another IRGC, another Revolutionary Guard from Iran, created in Iraq, something like Hezbollah. And the day that the Popular Mobilization Forces were created, we started to ring the alarm that this is creating a problem for the future. We predicted that the Popular Mobilization Forces, the Iran-backed militias, would one day attack Kurdistan. And unfortunately, we are now seeing that come true. So we have all of the problems that we had before 2014, untouched, festering away. We have new problems that have been created, genocide, popular mobilization units, units directed and commanded by Iranian leaders, and so on. And then we have a prime minister who has not really been able to create an atmosphere of reconciliation. So for us, how much longer should we wait to have a referendum? How much longer should the people of Kurdistan continue to be the second-class citizen, the constitution being violated, articles of the constitution not being implemented? So for us, we felt that we had waited long enough, and that, in fact, there were many who wanted the referendum to take place in 2016. The political will was not there then, but in 2017, the vast majority of political parties in Kurdistan wanted the referendum. We were under the pressure to postpone the referendum on the promise that the US and the UN would broker a dialogue and a negotiation with Baghdad. We wanted a guarantee that if those negotiations failed, that we could hold a referendum then and that it would be supported. We didn't get that guarantee. And so in the end, it was decided to go ahead with the referendum.
So in the context, in the aftermath of the referendum, you've now seen the invasion of Kirkuk, which was a position that the Kurdish Peshmerga fiercely held in the face of ISIS. When ISIS had originated from between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they stormed Mosul, they stormed Kirkuk. It was the Iraqi security forces that abandoned post and the Kurdish forces that held the integrity of Kirkuk away from the ravages that you described that ISIS was responsible for. What is the meaning of Kirkuk to the Kurdish people themselves? We've heard that the Kurdish people have defined it as the Jerusalem of Kurdistan in the past. Obviously, it has strong commercial significance as an oil refinery city. But I would love to hear your views, Your Excellency, on what the meaning of Kirkuk is for Kurdistan.
Kirkuk is often described as the oil-rich city of Kirkuk, and that explains a lot as to why it is contested. But for us, from a Kurdish perspective, Kirkuk is historically, geographically, culturally, linguistically part of Kurdistan. It doesn't mean that everybody there is Kurdish. Of course, there are Turkmen, Assyrians, Arabs, and others in Kirkuk. But when you look at maps from the Ottoman era, Kirkuk is in Kurdistan. It became a contested city and a contested province because oil was discovered there by the British about 80, 100 years ago. For us, it is a significant place, and so many lives have been lost because of the disputed nature of Kirkuk. The people of Kirkuk have suffered gerrymandering of the borders of their province to change the demographics, to minimize the number of Kurds there. There has been genocide in Kirkuk. There has been a program called by the Iraqi government of the time Arabization. What did that mean? Kurds were literally forced out of their homes, only with the clothes on their backs, and Arab settlers were paid to move into their homes and properties. And if I may go back to the constitution, The Iraqi constitution of 2005 stipulates that the disputed territories, which include Kirkuk, it's not the only disputed territory, the disputed territories should be resolved through a mechanism set out in the constitution. And this mechanism, very briefly, is to allow people who were the original people of Kirkuk to return, compensate the settlers so they can move elsewhere, have a census, and then a referendum, so that the people of the disputed territories can choose, do they want to be under the federal government's authority or to join the Kurdistan region. The deadline for this was the end of 2007, exactly 10 years ago. Neither Baghdad nor the international community was interested in implementing Article 140. If they had, perhaps we would not be where we are today. For us, the blood that has been spilt over Kirkuk, the oppression, the cruelty, the genocide, the Arabization program, we cannot forget that. It's impossible to forget that. Too much has been at stake for the people of Kurdistan and Kirkuk. We are still prepared to talk about Kirkuk and the other disputed territories within the framework of the Constitution. The Constitution is a very good document. It sets out how we will all live together. It sets out a resolution for issues like the disputed territories. Let's go back to that and let's find a peaceful way of settling this.
It's a heart-wrenching issue now, the Constitution, because what you're seeing today is almost the intensification of that Arabization policy of Kirkuk with the Arab militia takeover of various pockets of the city, and indeed I think the whole city at this point. This consortium of militias that are acting in Kirkuk, presumably organized by that Iranian mastermind, the IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani. What are they doing to the Kurdish population in Kirkuk today? And could you give us a sense as to who they are? Who are these actors that are belligerently not just subverting the Constitution of Article 140, but also responding to a democratic exercise like a referendum with a military response?
Yes, exactly. We exercised a democratic process, arguably the highest form of expression. Yes. And the response has been tanks and Humvees. So the militias are Iraqi. We don't say that they're Iranian, they're Iraqi, but they are advised by Iran. Recently, when they attacked Altun Kupri, which is near Kirkuk, there were artillery experts embedded with them. They are loyal to Iran on their tanks and Humvees provided by the United States sometimes. They carry pictures of Khamenei and other Iranian leaders. Their propaganda, when you watch their propaganda machinery, it's very clear where their loyalty lies. Some of them have played a role in Iraq for a very long time, Badr and others. There are people like Hadi al-Amiri, Abu Mahdi Mohandes, and others.
Terrorists.
Well, some of them have been accused of killing Americans, so yes. But they are guided, they are instructed, they are trained by Iran. We question their loyalty to Iraq. We believe that their loyalty lies elsewhere. We also question the power of the Iraqi government and the Prime Minister's office to control them. We are confident that Prime Minister Abadi wants to control all of the armed forces in Iraq, but we are not sure that he's able to do so. What we have seen in Kirkuk since the takeover by the Iraqi military and the Iran-backed militia is 170,000 people fleeing for their lives. Nobody leaves their home in that situation unless they fear for their lives or the lives of their children. So 170,000 people fleeing overnight tells you something. In Tuz-Hormatu, which is also very close to Kirkuk, Amnesty International yesterday issued a report on Monday alerting the world to what is happening in Tuz-Hormatu, where homes of Kurds have been burnt, properties have been taken over, and Amnesty is highlighting the human rights abuses there. So unfortunately, places that were stable, Kirkuk was actually quite stable despite its disputed nature under Governor Najmuddin Karim. Until October 16th, it was a stable part of Iraq. Now you have another mass displacement of people, another humanitarian crisis, and the potential for civil war in Kirkuk and elsewhere.
Some people would say that the referendum catalyzed this attack. Was it inevitable, or was it that the referendum was a spark in this tinderbox waiting to explode? What was some of the visibility that you may have had of what the intent were for these private militias or these sectarian militias for what they were thinking of when they attacked ISIS originally? Did they have Kurdistan in their target lines in the road ahead, or was that something that they said, no, we're going to repel ISIS and retreat back to Baghdad and focus on stability?
For us, the militias, particularly the Iran-backed militias, have been a threat from the day that they were created. We have sounded the alarm from that moment onwards. I and colleagues in Washington have been talking about this threat. We believe that Iran has had its eye on Iraqi Kurdistan for a very long time. Its plan is to divide and conquer, to divide us geographically, politically, and to have a weak, unstable Kurdistan like the rest of Iraq. It is not in Iran's interest to have a stable, democratic, prosperous Iraq or Kurdistan on its doorstep. So what we are seeing today, from our perspective, has been the plan all along. Maybe the referendum gave them the spark or the excuse, but I'm sure if we go back to our meeting notes from 2 years ago, there will be notes where we have been telling our friends in the international community that we're very fearful about the potential for an attack from the Iran-backed militias.
Since the advent of ISIS, Canada has been contributing training and assistance to the Kurdish Peshmerga, who have proven to be brave, ferocious, heroic allies. The Kurdish people share the same values as Canadians do of pluralism, tolerance, the aspiration for democracy. In so many ways, Kurdistan is an ally of Canada's. What can Canada do now in the context of this imminent civil war as the Kurdish people are being suppressed by so many actors in the region? What's your advice to the Government of Canada here during your visit to Ottawa on what this country can do to help provide some leadership?
Well, the threat to us is very real. We're under an economic blockade by Baghdad, but with the help of our neighbors. And for example, flights have been banned to Kurdistan. This is not only impacting business, but also it means that international journalists can't go and can't report for themselves on what's happening from the ground.
You have a sympathy for this. You used to be a journalist.
Yes, and I definitely believe in being present somewhere. I think it makes a difference.
It does.
So for us, the threat is real, the economic blockade is real, and the military threat is not just a threat now. Baghdad, with the backing of the Iran-backed militias, has been attacking us. They attacked us in Altun Kupri. Monday morning, they attacked in 3 places, in Mahmur, near Rabi'a, and in another area. And we are, in fact, as of now, Tuesday evening, we're very fearful that by tomorrow morning there may be an attack in Rabi'a, near Zumar and Sahela. We believe that what the militias want to do is to cross over from Rabi'a, which is close to Syria, to then be able to block the Syrian and Turkish border crossings. This is a very real threat. The Peshmerga have so far, in Rabi'a, Mahmur and other places where we've been attacked, they have pushed back, and the Iraqi forces haven't been able to progress forwards. And if this attack that I just described does take place, then we will fight back. And this is where the potential for war, for civil war, is there. This is where we need the international community to act, to step in. It's not enough to say we're watching, we're monitoring, or we're not taking sides. It's time to attack. It's time to act. Excuse me.
Point well taken. Was it a tactical retreat on behalf of the Kurds when they did not hold the line in Kirkuk when the militias came? Or was it a betrayal by certain actors of Kurdish society?
It was both. We saw the deployment of Iraqi troops and Iran-backed militias. We warned the international community, those of us in Washington told our friends in DC about what was happening. And the Peshmerga did prepare a defense.
They knew that this was
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean, the Iraqi counterterrorism service, the Shia militias or the Iran-backed militias were moving in very large numbers. It was impossible for the United States not to know. They described it in a different way from how we described it. That's where there may have been a disconnect. We did prepare, but the problem was that a certain faction within one party, so it wasn't the entire party, it was a certain family within one party, made a secret agreement with Prime Minister Abadi, brokered by Qasem Soleimani of Iran, that they would withdraw from key positions in Kirkuk. And they had the elite force, they had the weapons and so on. So we didn't know about the rest of the Peshmerga and the rest of that party, and the KDP and others didn't know about this agreement. So when they withdrew unilaterally, of course it pulled the rug from everyone's feet. And then a decision was made that in order to avert bloodshed, that there would be a tactical withdrawal. But since then, in Altun Kupri and other places, we have fought back, and we will do so. We have made that very clear. The Peshmerga are not in an aggressive posture, they're in a defensive posture.
Would you consider that to be a red line?
Absolutely. We've already warned the Iraqis, we've warned the Iranian-backed militias, we've explained to the international community, to the United States, to Canada, that any further attacks, and we will fight back. And this has the potential to end up in a civil war. We don't want that, and I believe Baghdad doesn't want that, and certainly the coalition should not want that. Otherwise, the entire Iraq project, so much has been invested in over the past several years. The project is finished.
So on that note, what can the international community do now with respect to this imminent threat tonight in these two areas that you've defined as red lines for the Kurdish interests?
Well, from our perspective, we have been calling for a dialogue with Baghdad for weeks and months, actually. Before, during, and after the referendum, we said that we wanted to have talks with Baghdad. Since October 16th, when Kirkuk was taken, we have still been repeatedly saying we want to enter a dialogue with Baghdad. What we are asking Canada and our other international partners to do is to warn Baghdad that any further escalation, any further military movements will not help the situation. We're asking our partners to call on Baghdad to stop any other military deployment and to begin a dialogue with Kurdistan. Our leadership, our cabinet has made an offer again. The offer has always been there, but it's been renewed to have a dialogue with Baghdad. We have frozen the result of the referendum. This is a huge concession, and there is uproar among the Kurdish population. So it's a big risk to take by our government to do this. But we see that that risk is necessary because we want to avert bloodshed and war. So we ask Canada to play its part. Canada has been a key player in the coalition against ISIS. It's provided military and humanitarian assistance. It's pledged money for the stabilization program.
Despite Baghdad's efforts to make sure that does not get to the Kurds.
Yes, we're still waiting for weapons and ammunition that was promised in 2016 to come over. We want Canada to play its role in the coalition, in the United Nations, play a role as it does in the international community as a leading voice on human rights, on democracy, and ask for a serious dialogue between Erbil and Baghdad. We're open to a dialogue on any subject. We haven't said it needs to be about the referendum. We're open to discuss anything that Baghdad wishes to discuss. The important thing is to avert and avoid bloodshed and to begin the conversation.
Excellency, Kurdistan has had very sophisticated diplomacy with its neighbors and with Baghdad and the international community for many years. You're an obvious example of one of the best in the Kurdish diplomatic community. Thank you so much for taking some time to visit with us at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute during your visit here in Ottawa. And we hope to see you successful and to see you back here when you can come back.
Well, thank you for your very generous comments, and thank you for this opportunity for explaining our position.
Good. Thank you.